Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everybody. I think most everybody here was here this morning to hear the preacher's sermon, so let me put your fears at rest. I am not the new preacher of Heartland Baptist Church. He has not handed me a baton of any kind. The title of the message is Loving Your Enemies. And I'll be speaking about love. And we'll take a look at what Jesus was talking about. I think everybody in here probably knows Jesus said that, love your enemies, and that it's in the Bible. But there are many kinds of love. We'll take a look at that word love. We're also going to look at enemies. I guess there's many kinds of enemies. And we'll look and see take a closer look at what Jesus was talking about there. And as you also probably know, Jesus is our example. And boy, what an example. Yeah. Well, first let me introduce myself to some of you who may not know a lot about me. My name's Wade Newbraw, and I'm here with my lovely wife, Melody, and my daughter, Guinevere. And we've been coming to Heartland Baptist Church since 2016, I guess, something like that, right before we came to this building. And I am a public school teacher. I've taught 21 years, from 5th grade to 12th grade, in public school, international school, and private school. Currently teaching 7th grade social studies at the middle school here in town. And yes, it does take a brave person to teach middle school. I'm also going to be talking about the people who killed Christ. We got a couple of main groups there. Of course, Christ's own people were involved with that. And as well as the Romans. We'll take a look at them. And then we'll ask the question, are we even capable of such love? I have a bachelor's degree in education that I got from the University of Missouri. You got to have one of those or something like it to teach in the state of Missouri. And then most teachers go on to get a master's degree in education. But I took a look at the class load for that degree, and it just looked completely boring. And my first love is history, of course, so I said, well, I'm going to get a master's in history. So I did, and with concentration in classical civilization, which is the ancient Greeks and Romans. So when I talk about the Romans, I have done quite a bit of study. I've got boxes and boxes of the books and the primary sources, and I've been through a lot of that stuff, and I don't know why I like it so much, but I just do. And then, of course, since 2016, I've had my first serious study of the King James Bible under Jim here. I'm so appreciative of that. When we first moved to Perryville, we went to the Baptist church over by Rogers. Is that First Baptist Church, I think? And we were there for several months, and I don't know, there just wasn't a connection there, and nothing bad about it. I just, we eventually said, this is just, there's something, we're not connecting somehow. And then we tried out at Bethlehem Baptist Church, I think it was, and they had a wonderful new building, but they didn't have a preacher. And so that didn't last long. And then I said, well, I told my wife one day, I saw this sign. There's a Heartland Baptist Church. It's in this little building over here in a little back road in town. It's not even a whole building. It's just a part of a building. But we could try it and see. And she says, okay. And so we went, and that was the best move we made. So, okay, enemy. Jesus said, love your enemies. So when we take a look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and we get a definition of enemy, it says, one that is antagonistic to another. One seeking to injure, overthrow, or confound an opponent. I don't know about you guys, but that seems a little, vague, not quite hitting the mark. I don't think that's the kind of enemy Jesus was talking about. As you know, as well as I do, God sets the bar pretty high. And when Jesus says, love your enemies, I think he's talking about real enemies. I've had some run-ins with people in the past. I remember having fist fights as a child, but Jesus isn't talking about childhood squabbles. I locked horns once or twice with the uppity sergeant in the Marine Corps, but that never really came to blows or anything, just mean words. I don't even think I've had a real enemy. You know, I've had lots of people that crossed paths with me in life, and something happens, you know, they offend me somehow. I get riled up or whatever. Somebody pulls out in front of me. You know, we live down by Shawnee-town, and we work in Perryville, come to church in Perryville, so we come to Perryville a lot. And I'll tell you the place where they pull out in front of you the most. P Highway, just south of town. You're coming north on 61, and it's kind of going over a hill, it's kind of coming around a curve, and you know, I'm driving at the legal 55, right, honey? Okay, maybe 60. I think I set the cruise control at 62 the last couple of weeks. But you come around there, and there'll be somebody sitting there getting ready to pull out. And you know they see you. And they pull right out in front of you, and you got to hit your brakes. Well, if you're in the new broad truck when that happens, it's not a moment of silence that follows that. And I don't say that to any sort of pride whatsoever, because it was probably three years ago, Jim preached a sermon on let your yeas be yeas and your nays be nays. And he talked about how we use our language in ways that are probably not pleasing to God. And I remember getting that and thinking to myself, well, I'm going to take a look at myself. I'm going to examine myself and just see how I'm doing that. And the next Sunday, I came back and I said, Jim, that's hard. I didn't realize how much I was letting things come out of my mouth that are probably not pleasing to God. And I've tried to fix that over the years. Not always successful, though. Boy, this world's a tough one, isn't it? I can give you a good example, because see, that's learned behavior. When we say things like that, when we use sarcasm, or we're critical of people, or we judge people verbally. You know, something happens, we say something. That's learned behavior, and let me give you a good example of that. You know, my dad is one of the most awesome human beings that I know. He's 90 years old. His mind is still pretty sharp, and he's a little cantankerous in his old age, but I love him to death. I had a great childhood. My mom and dad loved each other, raised us kids out in the country. I had us in 4-H, took us to Sunrise Christian Church, and I had a patch of woods to run around. I had a wonderful childhood. But my dad had a job in town, and he tried to farm at the same time. And we didn't have a lot of money, so instead of buying farming equipment that was in good condition, he would buy farming equipment that was broke or close to it and fix it and use it. Well, what that translates into is we were always fixing something. And sometimes when things didn't go right, my dad would get mad. And when my dad got mad, he cussed. Well, I learned that behavior. I grew up and I learned it. And I've spent a lifetime trying to get rid of it. And what I found is that it's easier for me to keep myself from getting mad than it is to try not to cuss if I'm really mad. So, you know, when you're teaching 7th grade, you have plenty of opportunities to get mad. I've had a lot of practice. So that's a good thing for me. But what's a real enemy? What kind of enemies was Jesus talking about? I can tell you, because he gave us the example. Jesus was talking about enemies that want to kill you. They want to take your life. Because if you can love that enemy, all the other enemies are a lot easier, or at least a little, even the ones that pull out in front of you. Turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5, please. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 48. And this is Jesus talking. If you can stand up to respect God, that would be great. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 48. Jesus says, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which in heaven is perfect." Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your many, many blessings. Blessings that we can't even count, the blessings that you give us. I ask you to forgive me my weakness. I ask you to give me strength and some self-discipline to try to live more like you want me to. I thank you for your word. For it is your guidance for us. It is everything. We thank you for your Son, without whose blood we would all be lost. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you. Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Why? Verse 45, that ye may be the children of your Father. And isn't that why we're here? Isn't that why we're here? We want to be the children of God. We want to go to heaven and spend eternity with Him. Well, if we want to stand here and say we're the children of God, we have to act like it. That means we need to love our enemies, because if we look at it close enough, but I say unto you, love your enemies, that doesn't sound like a suggestion. That sounds like a command. We need to do that. And sometimes that can be really hard. I have come up with a 3-step plan to help you, though. So, when somebody crosses your path and they do something to offend you, they do something wrong, step number 1, keep the mouth closed. See, I'm already having trouble with step number 1, but I'm working on that. Step number 2, wait for truth to be revealed. In my experience, a lot of times when something happens in my relationship with other people, and I think I know why they did that. But then later, I come to find out something else is going on, and I have to rethink it. I have to think, oh, wow, I probably shouldn't have said that, or I probably should have done that a little differently now that I know the truth. And then that will give you time to act accordingly. If you can keep the mouth closed and wake or seek the truth. If there's something you can do to find out what's really going on. Maybe that person pulled out in front of me because she just left home because her husband slapped her in the face and said she's worthless. What, should I be mad at her because she pulled out in front of me? Or say something derogatory about it, about that person? You know, maybe that guy pulled out in front of me because his wife's home drunk on the couch and it's only noon. Is that enough to make somebody upset that they pull out in front of other people, maybe unknowingly or accidentally? Maybe. I shouldn't be angry at somebody if they're having a day like that. So sometimes what we see isn't necessarily the truth or the whole truth. And so as children of God, we need to seek that. We need to pray for it. And in our relationships with people, when something goes sideways, maybe approach it a little more carefully than how we've learned to do it. Certainly I need to do that. It's like Jim says when he preaches, he's preaching about it, preaching to himself. I need this more than any of y'all. All right, so we've taken a look at enemies. A real enemy is somebody who wants to kill you. What about love? Well, let's see what Merriam-Webster has to say about love. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary says, love is a feeling of strong or constant affection for a person. Strong or constant affection for a person. I don't know about you, but that seems totally inadequate to describe the love that Jesus is talking about. But this is the world's definition. Merriam-Webster, I'm sure, has people that says, well, now we can't offend anybody. Be careful how you word that. And certainly I'm not out to offend anybody, but I think you can only step so far in that direction before you start leaving truth. It falls far short. Jesus is talking about God's love. And, well, thank God, that's the real stuff. And, of course, we can always go to John 15:13, which says, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. See, what Jesus is talking about is sacrificial love. He's talking about a love that requires sacrifice. That's what he's talking about there. And then, of course, there's always the John 3:16. That's a pretty popular one. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Who among us would sacrifice a child for somebody else? Certainly, I don't think I'm capable of that. That's the kind of love Jesus was talking about. Turn with me to Luke 23. Luke chapter 23. You'd think I'd have these all bookmarked in here. Luke chapter 23, verse 30. Let's start with 33. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Verse 34. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. Now I'm kind of reaching the end before I start here, but I think now's a good time to just take a look at that. They nailed him to the cross, and then he says this. But he went through so much more. He's asking forgiveness for these people. First, his own people that screamed for his death. For the Romans, of course, they were experts at it. And he's saying forgive them because he has love for them. Who among us would be capable of such love? Let me tell you a little bit about the Romans. According to many historians, the Romans were the pinnacle of ancient civilization as far as the Western world is concerned. They had accomplished so many things. The arch, for example. Humans had been struggling for centuries to use the arch in architecture. The Romans perfected that. They figured out how to do that. Building round buildings was a challenge, even for the Greeks. There's only a handful of round buildings in Greece that they built because it was difficult for them. Hardly anybody knew how to do it, but the Romans had no problem with it. Some of their round buildings they still exist. Water hydraulics. The Romans understood water hydraulics better than anyone had before them. Their road system was more extensive, well built and used in ways that nobody had ever done before, except maybe the Persians. But the Roman system is famous. It's still famous today. You may have heard all roads lead to Rome. Well, there was a reason why that became a saying. They invented concrete. They came up with the idea of spectacle. And that's the dark underside of the Roman world. First, they were very pagan. Paganism was suffused through every aspect of their culture. They believed in many gods and goddesses. A lot they had borrowed from the Greeks. They borrowed a lot from the Greeks, but came up with a lot of stuff on their own. Slavery was something they institutionalized, they industrialized slavery. Maybe no other civilization in the ancient world used slaves to such an extent as the Romans. And they had a real problem with it. You know, the problem with having a slave is you always got to be afraid that they're going to rebel. You know, that's a problem for slave owners. Thank goodness we don't quite have that today as far as that's concerned, as an institution anyway. But the Romans also took entertainment to a whole new level. The Romans were well associated with death, and they used it for entertainment. The first gladiator battle is recorded to have happened in the 3rd century BC at the funeral of a wealthy nobleman. They took 2 slaves and made them fight to the death. And that kind of caught on. So that 4 centuries later, they build the biggest monument to death, as far as I know, has ever been built, and that's the Colosseum in Rome. That was built for death to be entertainment. And when you study the history of what went on in there, it's really pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking. The lengths they went to entertain the Roman citizens or whoever showed up with violence and death. The Romans were well acquainted with it. Now, when it came to criminals and slaves, of course, they had a very special way of execution, and that was called crucifixion. Crucifixion predates the Romans, but the Romans, they industrialized it. They used it. In the 1st century BC, a gladiator slave named Spartacus, led a revolt. And he started in Capua. That's where he was from, Eastern Europe. The Romans at that time, when they went to war against people, which they were always going to war against people, instead of just winning the battle, killing the soldiers, and then saying, okay, now you got to do what we say, here's your tax list, they would capture as many soldiers as they could and take them back to Italy to be trained as gladiators. The ones that showed promise as warriors, the ones that stood out as good warriors, they would send them to gladiator school. The rest of them, they would give them no training really, herd them into wherever they were going to have this mock battle, and then all the Romans would show up and they would have this mock battle. These 2 sides would fight each other to the death for the entertainment of the Romans. Well, Spartacus was chosen to go to gladiator school in Capua, and he leads a rebellion of gladiators, and they break out. And what ends up happening, he ends up gathering an army of ex-slaves that all ran away, over 50,000 strong. And they actually defeated 2 Roman armies in battles that were sent to destroy them. They marched all the way to northern Italy. All they had to do was cross the Alps and they were home free. But they decided to turn around and go back and sack some more of Italy. They got greedy. Well, finally, a Roman, the wealthiest Roman in the empire at that time, it was the Republic technically at that time, Crassus, he uses his money to build another army, and he begins to use something called decimation, which if the soldiers don't perform well, they pick out every 10th man and execute him in front of his friends. And he says, yeah, you guys better fight hard this time. Well, they did, and they beat Spartacus. They crucified 6,000 of these slaves on the road from Rome to Capua. So the Romans knew all about crucifixion. But it was a process. The Romans were famous for their law codes and their justice system. In many places where they would execute criminals or slaves, the main post would already be in place. And then when someone was sentenced to crucifixion, they would be forced to carry the crosspiece to the place of execution. But that's not really how it started. Once someone was convicted, and once they had been sentenced, they were handed over to the Roman soldiers, the guards, and they would be scourged. Now, you're talking about a system that lasted centuries, so I'm sure it changed and it varied. But generally, scourging was a whipping. You would be stripped naked, and then you would be whipped. And they had different kinds of whips. There was one that had metal balls on it, and it was designed to cause contusions, possibly breaking bones, hairline fractures, and contusions under the skin. So basically, you're bleeding under your skin. And then they would use one that had, they found one that had sharp sheep bones. Something that would lacerate the skin and cause massive bleeding. And there's a lot of, we don't have any text that goes into depth on this. There's a lot of historians, guessing about this. But they think that maybe this became pretty severe based on the guards themselves, because the guards had to take the person, get them on the cross, and stay there until they were dead. And if the guards were in a hurry, they probably whipped them harder, sent them into shock, hoping they would die sooner rather than later. But there are cases of the Romans using ropes instead of nails, and the person hanging there for days. Because crucifixion is about two things, really. It's about one of the most painful and excruciating deaths possible, but it's also about extreme humiliation for whoever's being crucified. Now, the Romans generally used nails, but they were not above using ropes. It just depended on how cruel they felt that day. Maximum pain and suffering was the goal there. That's where we get the word excruciating. It comes from the Latin excruciatus, which means literally out of the cross. Before Jesus was taken on the Mount of Olives, the Gospels tell us that he was praying and an angel came and ministered to him. And then, after that, he sweated drops of blood. See, Jesus was God. Jesus knew what was coming. He prayed that the cup could pass from him. So that tells me, well, I guess it was possible. But he said, thy will be done. And it had to be done. He knew it was coming, and he did it voluntarily. I know if an angel came and ministered to me, I'd probably feel better. Jesus sweated drops of blood. I'm going to go to Matthew 26:53. This is just amazing to me. I haven't read the Bible as many as a lot of people in this room, but I have read through it several times, and it shouldn't surprise me that I find things that astound me. Really. It wasn't too long ago, I was in the Psalms somewhere. God knows the names of the stars. Wow. Last I heard, there were billions and billions of them. That's just amazing. All right, so I'm in Matthew 26:53, verse 53. Actually, I'm backing up a little bit to 51. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? By the way, that's 72,000. But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? So he had his disciples there. I guess there could have been a big fight. That would have been possible. But when it starts, Jesus cuts it short and he says, this is my cup. Shall I not drink it? In fact, if we go to John 18:11, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Verse 11, then said Jesus unto Peter, put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? He sweated his drops of blood. I think he was ready. I think he knew what was coming, and I think he was ready. And he said, look, guys, this has to be done. When they took Jesus, they bound him, but they did not immediately turn him over to the Romans. They took him to where there was an assembly of the priests and the scribes and the elders. And there, the leaders of the Jewish community in Jerusalem questioned Jesus and tried to find some way to convict him. Because, see, they weren't allowed to kill him themselves. They had to take him to the Romans. The Romans were in charge. All right, Israel and Judea at that time belonged to the Roman Empire. There was a Roman governor in the place called Pontius Pilate. That's how he pronounced his own name, Pontius Pilate. They had to take him to him to get him killed. But first, they had to have a charge. You know, he was a Roman. He believed in the law and all that kind of stuff, right? They had to have a charge. They had to be able to convict him of something. They bring in false witnesses, but they can't get anything to nail him down. The false witnesses, their stories are conflicting or something like that. It's not working out for them. And you can almost read between the lines that the high priest, and Caiaphas, the high priest, is getting frustrated with the whole process because they're trying to convict him of something worthy of death, and they can't do it. No wonder there, huh? Now this one is real interesting. I'm going to Mark chapter 14, verse 60 and 62. Mark chapter 14, verses 60 through 62. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witnesses against thee? But he held his peace and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him and said unto him, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. And what did the high priest do? Then the high priest rent his clothes and saith, what need we any further witnesses? They didn't realize it. Right there, Caiaphas had the opportunity to believe. He was in a position of power and influence. He could have made a difference. But in his heart, he rejected Jesus. And convinced many others to do so as well. The next day, they took him to Pilate. And they said, this man needs to die. He has violated our laws. And here he is for you to examine. Now, Pilate, you got to understand, the Romans were very racist. And then they believed themselves to be the best of the best. I mean, they were the Romans, right? And so they kind of had a habit of looking down on other peoples. And here's these strange people, these Hebrews. They were always causing trouble. They wouldn't worship the emperor. Who ever heard of that? And they had one God. I mean, how poor were these people to only have one God? But if you understand the Romans, you understand Pilate, he probably couldn't grasp that. He would say, he would probably hedge his bets and say, well, maybe I better worship this God too. I better put a little offering in the plate just to hedge my, make sure I'm pleasing everybody. That's how the Romans would have thought about that. So Pilate questions Jesus, and he's not a stupid man. He realizes the Jews really have no charge against him. And so he sends him to Herod. Well, Herod had heard of Jesus, and it says, I don't have the book in front of me, but it says in one of the Gospels he wanted to meet Jesus because he'd heard about him. But before very long, even Herod and his soldiers began to mock Jesus, and they beat him up. Oh, by the way, the priests beat him up too, and they mocked him. They blindfolded him and began to strike him and saying, okay, prophecy. If you're the Son of God, who struck you? They began to spit on him. I run into that once in a while with the 7th graders. I was in the hall just the other day. I think it might have been Friday. In the hall, the middle school was built as an elementary school. And we've got middle schoolers in there, so during hall passing, it's really crowded. And I'm walking down the hallway, and the hallway's full of kids, and I see this girl turn around. He spit in my hair. I'm like, ugh. Whenever I see it, I make them stop. I say, no. Spitting is very disrespectful, and we're not going to do that. Whenever I come across it, I do that. But we're not talking about children. We were talking about grown-ups. These are some of the most powerful men in the Jewish community spitting on Jesus. Pilate questions Jesus, and Jesus, it's not that he won't answer him, but he doesn't answer a lot, according to the Gospels. Herod ends up taking Jesus back to Pilate. In one of the Gospels, they say Herod and Pilate became buddies after that. But Herod couldn't give Pilate a reason either. Now, at one point, Caiaphas tells Pilate, well, he claimed to be the Son of God. And so Pilate, when he hears this, he goes, uh-oh. Because you got to remember, he believed in many gods and goddesses. He believed in all the mythology as being real. And all that fake mythology of the Greeks and Romans is full of stories about half-god, half-man heroes and things like that. And so, knowing the Romans, Pilate has probably said, well, I better be careful. I better tread lightly and make sure this is not actually the son of some god. And so he questions Jesus further, and he finds no fault in him. And he goes back to the people. The people are all gathered outside of Pilate's. Pilate's got a seat, a special seat that he sits in when he's Pilate the judge. And he has to judge over these Hebrew people. They're not Romans. I've been sent here. I don't know how much he liked his position. Some places in the empire were much worse than others. But he's there in his position as judge, and the people, and he tells the people, I find no fault in this man. When you read it, it's almost like he's hesitant to order his execution. And of course, the priests are there whipping up the crowd, and saying, no, you got to crucify this guy. It happened to be a day when Pilate could release a criminal, almost like a presidential pardon, if you will, do something like that. And he says, well, I have this power to do this today, so I'm gonna let him go. And the people are, no, you can't do that. Give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. Barabbas was a murderer that had been locked up. He said, release him instead. And the crowd gets so whipped up that Pilate finally succumbs to the will of the crowd. And he turns to his soldiers and he says, okay, crucify him. In Mark, the book of Mark, he writes that the whole band of soldiers took Jesus in a back room. Now, the whole band, I don't know how many that was. But knowing that Pilate was the governor there in Jerusalem, surrounded by these conquered people, he probably had quite a few for his protection. And they take Jesus, and they beat him up, and they spit on him. And they put and one gospel says scarlet, another purple. I don't think it matters too much. They put a robe on him that was supposed to symbolize that he was a king. And they mocked him. And they would bend the knee and mockingly say, oh, yes, you're the king, and all that. And then they beat him up, and then they scourged him. They stripped him, scourged him. In fact, they scourged him so bad they had to find somebody else to carry the crosspiece. And I suspect that they wanted to get this over with quickly because this Jesus fellow was very popular. And he had a lot of followers. And they were all gathered there as well as the mob. And they probably said, we got to end this quick. We don't want there to be a lot of trouble. They took Jesus up a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, also called Calvary. Then they nailed him to the cross. And that would have been nails, 7 to 10 inches long. One through each hand into the wood of the cross. And they hung him, and then they drove a nail through his feet into the wood of the cross. And then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Who among us here is capable of such love? After everything they did to him, he still loved him. Finally, when Pilate brings Jesus out after he's been scourged, and he comes out and he says, behold your king. And the crowd starts screaming, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Did Jesus stand there with love in his heart for those people? Yeah, he did. He did. Imagine, if you can, looking out on your own people, rejecting you. It must have broken his heart. After everything they did, he still loved them. Maybe even knowing, and I don't know, maybe even knowing that they were sending themselves to hell because they rejected him. But maybe not. Jesus asked for forgiveness for them. Maybe they were. Even after everything we do, he still loves us. And that is a comforting thought.
I asked my kids that the other night. We was doing family devotions. I said, how many of y'all have an enemy? A bunch of them raised their hand. Really? You know, Dad's a little surprised. You know what they said? It's the devil, Dad. It's the devil. He's our enemy. You know, here I am trying to teach my kids, and they're all theological and proper about it. They know exactly who their enemy is. But no, let's bring it human. Sometimes we act like we have enemies, don't we? We have people that we just really don't like, don't get along with. They do things that irritate, annoy, get under our skin, makes us want to not treat them very nice. And Jesus endured all of that, and he said, Father, forgive them. It's easy to love those that love you. It's easy to love your friends, those you get along with and like. But what have you proved with that? Nothing. Not a thing. But if you can love your enemies, those that, Brother Wade, I didn't mean to pull out in front of you, brother. I didn't see you. People
I'm sure none of the keepers pull out in front of people.
People come flying up that road from the south. Those southern people, they are fast drivers, and they come along through there, and you pull out, and you're gonna, old person driving, you're not getting on it to get out of there, squealing the tires. You just kind of pull out and you head into town in a relaxing kind of, country way. And next thing you know, you got this guy on your bumper with a beard. Well, thank you, brother, for sharing. And loving our enemies is something we're going to need to be good at in the days to come. There might be opportunity in the days to come when we're turned in for our beliefs, for our practices. Can we say, as the Lord did, as several others have done, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do? They don't understand. The truth of the matter is sometimes we get a little ugly. All somebody's got to do is pull out in front of us, or, not play volleyball like what we would do, Can't you hit the ball right? You know what I'm saying? For the silliest things, we have enemies. But he says you need to love them. You need to love them. Because you don't even know what a real enemy is if you're getting sideways with somebody over silly stuff. Let's stand together tonight. Let's stand together.